It's strange how distance begins as something barely visible, like dust in a beam of light at the kitchen table, and then one night you realize you've been breathing it for months without saying a word. The dinners went quiet first, forks tracing slow circles over plates, glasses sweating untouched lines onto the wood, the hum of the refrigerator becoming a metronome for a song neither of us sang anymore. She started coming home late, carrying rain even when the sky was dry, as if the weather had learned her name and followed her through revolving doors and elevator shafts and long hallways that didn't end at me. Her laughter became private, low, contained in her throat, something that happened 2 feet above the phone she kept face down on the table until it glowed like a lighthouse meant for a ship I couldn't see. I told myself it was a season, a passing cold front that would lift when we slept in on Sunday and stayed in our pajamas until noon. I told myself love has quiet years. People who are brave don't name every silence, they warm them, they wait them out. But the waiting turned into a ritual, and rituals are just ways of admitting the change without confessing the cause. I started washing dishes slower, listening for her keys at the door, counting the clicks of the hallway light as if numbers could bless us back into shape. The city outside our window pressed gray on the glass, streetlights smearing themselves into soft halos on wet asphalt, buses exhaling tiredly as if they too were trying not to say too much. Her name is Lena. On good nights her voice used to have a warm rasp that made ordinary words sound like relief. Lately, that rasp grew smaller, like a match struck and cupped in 2 hands against wind. She wore a blazer more often, changed her perfume so it floated past like a question I pretended not to hear, and she started setting her tote down carefully, as if it could bruise, as if the kitchen would argue if she entered too quickly. I asked about her day in a voice that wasn't mine. She answered in sentences that were appropriately long and perfectly empty, and sometimes she smiled at the middle distance the way people do when a memory in someone else's eyes catches the light. The night I found proof wasn't cinematic. It was dull and honest, like a drawer that sticks and then gives. She was in the shower. Steam clouded the bathroom mirror into a white meadow where our faces might have bloomed if things were different. Her phone lit the dark edge of the sink. A vibration, then another. I didn't plan to look. My hand moved before my better self could catch it, like a reflex in someone else's body. Messages opened into a room I'd never been invited to. A thread of words that had both of their fingerprints on it. His name saved as a single initial that thought it could hide in plain sight. Pet names that had never existed in our house. Locations. Excuses that suddenly made more sense than the nights she called me baby from a cab and said she was almost home. There was a photo, his hand on her waist in a dim booth, her face angled toward him, not smiling with her eyes, but with everything else that mattered. A timestamp from a Tuesday I remember for burned chicken, and a joke I tried twice that landed nowhere. My first feeling wasn't rage. It was a grief so quiet it made the sink look larger and the mirror look merciless. I set the phone down as if it might wake, as if it could tell on me to the person I used to be. The water shut off. The bathroom door opened. She stepped into the hallway in a towel, hair wet and coiled at her nape, rain pretending to be steam. "Everything okay?" she asked, and she meant the evening, not the life. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going to bed." Sleep didn't come. The radiator ticked. A neighbor laughed somewhere above us, the sound moving like a small animal across our ceiling. When Lena slid into bed, she turned her back, the goodnight kiss landing somewhere that wasn't my mouth and didn't deserve to be called a kiss. I stared at the window until it became a shallow lake of city light, and somewhere between wanting to leave and wanting to rewind, something in me just stopped. The next morning, she acted like mornings do. They pretend nothing happened and dare you to tell the truth. Coffee hissed, a bus coughed outside. The spoon clinked the side of a mug like a polite applause for surviving another hour. She wore the blazer again, checked her phone again, wrapped her scarf twice and didn't look at me when she said, "We should talk tonight." "Okay," I said, and in that okay was a resignation that felt like a basement, flooding one step at a time. Work blurred. Paperwork, emails, meetings where someone's slide deck about market share felt obscene, like wearing bright colors to a funeral. By the time I came home, she had beaten me there. The apartment smelled like rain and citrus, the way it always does after she wipes down the counters with a dish rag when she wants to look like she tried. She stood by the window, hands in pockets, watching the traffic stack red and white down the block. "Who is he?" I asked softly, because there's a kind of gentleness that isn't mercy, it's anesthesia. She closed her eyes. "Open them, it's not what you think," she started, then stopped, and the stopping told me she still had a piece of me somewhere she hadn't yet decided to keep or throw away. "I saw," I said, "the messages. The photo." Lena nodded like confessing to a weather report. His name is Aaron, she said, and the sound of it broke something that had been refusing to bend. We didn't mean for it to, she swallowed. I'm not happy, you know that. We haven't been us for a long time. There is a kind of math grief does. It measures the distance between what's true and what was promised, and tells you the square root of hope is smaller than you think. I could have asked when it started where they went, what he had that I didn't. Instead, the only question that came out was, did you love me when you came home after him? She looked at the floor. I don't know what love means anymore, she said, and the honesty hurt worse than a lie would have. We decided not to decide that night. She slept on the couch. I lay in our bed and wondered if the shape of her body in the cushions would look like a map out of this, or a chalk outline. The clock blinked 2:17, 3:04, 4:39, and at 5:12 the city began again, forgiving nothing and offering coffee. In the days that followed, our apartment became an exhibit, a study in polite endings. We moved around each other like careful ghosts, leaving sticky notes on the fridge about groceries, as if grocery lists could hold a house together. She started spending weekends at her sister's to think. I washed sheets that didn't smell like her anymore, and learned the sound of my own breathing when I couldn't hear hers. A week later, her tone turned clinical. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and told me she was going to consult a lawyer just to understand options. There was a cold competency in how she said custody that made the word feel like a drawer of knives. I think it's better if I have primary, she said, eyes steady, voice even, and the room leaned like a ship in wind. Primary, I repeated, and the syllables felt medical, like something you get told before a procedure. Lena, he's 7, I said. You're asking me to be a visitor. It's what's best for routine, she replied, and her voice had already learned courtroom vowels, the kind that say stability when they mean possession. That night after she left to let the air clear, I sat at the kitchen table with the paperwork she'd printed from the co-parenting resource site and noticed how the lamp wove a small sun into the wood. I remembered the day our son, Theo, was born, how she let me count the breaths between contractions, how my hand was a raft she held without asking. Grief, when it's this kind, doesn't knock. It turns the handle and sits down where she used to sit. The first court date came in a month of rain. By then, Lena had practiced phrases into instruments: stability, continuity, attachment. I wore the only suit I own, the one I bought for my father's funeral, and the lining smelled faintly of mothballs and old condolences. She didn't look at me when we took our seats. The room was all hard benches and clocks that insisted on being noticed. Our lawyer leaned in and said, "Be clear, be calm, don't perform." When the judge asked her to speak first, she did not hesitate. She said full custody like it was the natural next chapter. She said, "I'm the primary caregiver," and for a moment I saw a slideshow of breakfasts I made, field trips I chaperoned, socks I paired while cartoons spoke to no one. Then she paused, folded her hands, and said, "He's a good father, but I need primary for Theo's well-being. It's a particular hell to be generous about someone who is taking something from you while everyone watches." The judge turned to me. "Do you wish to respond?" I rose. The whole courtroom drew in a breath, the kind of hush that changes a life by standing still. My mouth opened, and what came out wasn't a speech or an argument or any of the lines I wrote at 3 a.m. and rewrote at 4:30. "I brought something," I said, voice steady, hands empty. The clerk walked over as if the floor might break. The judge nodded. "Proceed," she said. And that's when everything shifted, and every eye lifted from the paperwork to the thing nobody knew existed yet. The reveal is imminent, suspended between breath and evidence. What changed the room wasn't anger. It was the sound of everyday life played back without decoration. I handed over a set of small, labeled USB drives. A month of mornings, a month of nights, the in-betweens where love either lives or leaves quietly with the recycling. For weeks while Lena was thinking, and Theo was padding around in socks that showed the wear of his favorite corners, I had set a small audio recorder on the mantle, next to the plant that refused to die. No spy movies, no high drama, just the sound our home had been making when we each thought the other wasn't listening. "Your Honor," my lawyer said softly, "these are ambient recordings made in the shared living room, where consent signs were posted per state code, acknowledged by both parties via text on March 12. The judge peered over her glasses. Lena shifted. Her jaw tightened the way it does when she remembers to be composed. The clerk pressed play. It began with a Tuesday at 6:11 a.m. Coffee hissing, milk frothing, Theo's little voice at half volume. "Daddy, can you find my blue dinosaur?" My voice. "Check the blanket cave. You slept on it last night, bud." Dishes, laughter, mine and his. The sound of a lunchbox snapping shut, a door opening, footsteps, Then Lena's voice, tired but gentle. You're early, and another voice, male, careful, softened for intimacy. Meeting got canceled. The courtroom didn't gasp then. It inhaled and held it. On another day's clip, 11:42 p.m., after a text had announced she'd be late, her keys turned and a laugh not meant for me entered first. "SHH," she whispered, and someone else said, "I've never done this." A pause, a kiss, the sound of rings against wood. My stomach folded in on itself like paper being taught a new shape. The judge raised a hand. "This is sufficient," she said, voice even, eyes not unkind. Lena looked down, pinched the bridge of her nose, let the image of a composed woman settle over the shaking one beneath. "Do you dispute the authenticity?" the judge asked. "No," Lena said, "I don't." After that, the legal part felt like weather answering its own question. The judge shifted the case from petitioning for full custody to a discussion about joint custody with a strong presumption for shared time, pending a parenting plan and therapy compliance. Words like stability returned, but this time they sat down next to continuity of care and documented involvement from both parents. When the gavel visited the desk, it was gentle, like a tap on the shoulder. Outside, the rain had grown serious, pooling into the city's small beliefs about itself. Curbside rivers, awning drums, umbrellas turning inside out, and then deciding to behave. Lena and I stood under the courthouse portico with too much space between us. "I didn't know you'd," she began, then stopped, because how do you finish a sentence that started with hiding and landed in daylight? "I didn't want this," I said. "I wanted us to talk before we turned into statements." She nodded at the stone steps. Aaron said, and the name cut the air again, glass in a blender. I held up a hand, not to silence her, but to leave her something unbroken to come back to later. "Tell me later," I said. "Tell me when you know what you're telling me." The days after were thin. Theo started asking different questions, not the big ones. Kids are merciful that way. He asked who would tuck him in on Thursdays, whether the blue dinosaur could travel in a backpack, whether missing someone feels like the same thing as forgetting them. We built new rituals. Spaghetti on Tuesdays, the park on Saturdays, reading the same book badly on purpose so he could correct me. In the quiet moments after he fell asleep on my shoulder, I'd smell the damp of his hair and think, this is a kind of salvation people write down and then cross out because they're afraid it's too soft to be true. Aaron. He was a shape I knew more by absence than presence. An outline in Lena's new habits, a laugh that lived in her phone, a perfume suddenly swapped for something sharper, like citrus had learned to become an edge. I didn't look him up. I didn't need his face. I knew enough. He was the corridor she walked down when our door felt too heavy. Once, when I went to drop Theo at Lena's new place, a smaller apartment with plants that seemed to be trying too hard to be alive, I caught a glimpse of him through the half-open door. He was average in every way that matters, and in the only way that matters, he wasn't me. He knelt and said, "Hey, champ," in a voice that wanted to be what it hadn't earned yet. On the train home, grief and something like pity sat side by side in me without arguing. Pity for all of us, really. The ways grown-ups get lost inside their own houses and leave breadcrumbs out of messages and late-night laughter and pretend they won't be followed. I thought about the recordings. About the line between evidence and eavesdropping, between the dignity I wanted and the survival I chose. I didn't feel proud. I felt. Sleep came in slices. The radiator still ticked, but now it sounded like a metronome for learning a new song. I cleaned, which is to say I made the apartment remember me. I opened windows to let the rain smell in. I found the courage to throw out the cracked mug she loved, because loving objects for the people they used to belong to is a superstition that looks like devotion until it turns into a shrine. I started running again early, while the city yawned and was honest about it. The air tasted like steel and wet newspapers, and I liked how the morning didn't care what I had done or what had been done to me. Then the turning point came quietly, as these things do. Sunday morning, Theo was at Lena's. I was at the sink, watching the sky perform its slow theater of gray to lighter gray. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I think we should talk, about Lena, about boundaries." It was Aaron. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I wrote back, "Boundaries is a good word. Coffee, public place. We met at a cafe that smelled like cinnamon and afterthoughts." He arrived wearing a coat that wanted to be expensive and a face that wanted to be older. We shook hands because men pretend that makes anything easier. He spoke first. "She told me she was leaving you." "That it was over," he said, voice careful as if the sentence were porcelain. "I didn't realize," he paused. "I didn't realize I was a cause, not a conclusion." I waited, then I said, "You're not a cause, you're a symptom." The cause is in our house, in the ways we stopped touching the same places at the same time. He nodded like someone who hears a diagnosis they can't treat. He looked sorry, Maybe he was, for himself likely, for me maybe a little. For Lena, almost. I won't be around Theo, he said suddenly, and it was a mercy I hadn't expected. Not for a long while. It's not my, he groped for the word. It's not my right. Thank you, I said, and meant it in the way that thanks sometimes means. I can breathe for a day or two now. He left. I stayed, watching steam unspool from my cup, thinking about how people ask the wrong questions about forgiveness. We act like it's a door you hold open for the person who cut you. It's not. It's the door you build inside your own chest so you can walk from one room to another without bumping into old furniture. That night, Lena texted, "Can we talk not about court, about us?" I said yes, because dignity isn't a wall. It's a window you learn to open without letting the storm in. She came over in a sweater I'd given her for a birthday before people became problems. Her eyes looked tired in a new way, like someone who had been honest with herself for more than 5 minutes in a row. "I don't know who I am without a fight," she said, sitting at the table where we used to circle Sunday crosswords together. "I made you the villain so I could be the survivor." Rain began in the alley with modesty, then grew. I asked for full custody because I thought if I won something big, the small breaking inside me would stop, she said. I didn't talk her out of her own confession. I let it hang in the air where it belonged. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to raise our son and to stop dying from things we won't say." She nodded, a tear landed on the table, made a dark coin, then disappeared into wood that had heard all of this before and would hear all of it again from other mouths. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "Maybe not," I said. "Maybe neither of us does. Maybe kindness isn't about deserving." We didn't hug, we didn't fight. We ended the night with a plan and a quiet that didn't hurt. When she left, the hallway light clicked twice, and for the first time in months, it sounded like a house clearing its throat rather than choking. Later in bed, the rain slowed to a hush you can only hear if you've already decided to sleep. And just before I drifted off, my phone buzzed once. A message from Lena. "I'm sorry, that's not the right word, but it's the true one I have." I stared at it, the blue light painting the ceiling into a shallow river, and typed a reply that I didn't send. Then another backspaced both. Finally, "Good night, Lena." The cursor blinked like a small heartbeat, and I let the moment remain unclosed, a breathing space where neither of us was right or wrong, just two people learning how to say the same sentence without bleeding. She has asked to talk not about court, but about us, with something still unsaid. She came back on a Thursday, when the city pretended not to be cold. Not returning to stay, but returning like a weather front, present, unarguable, meeting the room where it kept the receipts. Theo was at my sister's for the night, a trade we made when we needed grown-up conversations to wear their full voices. The apartment had been tidied into a version of itself that remembered the good. I left the window cracked. The radiator found its rhythm. The kettle waited on the edge of boil. Lena knocked, then entered without waiting, which is how married people used to do it. She stood just inside the door, looking like someone who had practiced a speech in a mirror and then decided to tell the truth instead. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup. The sweater again, sleeves shoved to elbows the way she does when she's about to roll up an old map and draw a new coastline over it. "I didn't come to renegotiate," she said, hands open, empty. "Or to ask you to wait for me to be brave." She glanced at the table, at the chair she used to fold a leg up under herself in. "I came to tell you why. There are speeches people give about affairs that sound like press releases. This wasn't one. I wanted to be someone else," she said, voice low, eyes on the floorboard seam that had always bothered me. "Not because you weren't enough, because I wasn't enough inside the person I'd agreed to be." She talked about the loneliness that grows quietly between two people who love each other and forget to say hello properly for a year. About nights the bed felt like a museum exhibit, marriage, 2015-2024, please do not touch. About wanting to be chosen without asking and punishing the world when it didn't guess right. "Aaron," she said at last, and then shook her head, as if the name were imprecise for the role it played. "He wasn't the point. He was the door I thought I could walk through to find the room I lost." She swallowed. "I didn't find it. I found how good I am at becoming a person I don't like. There's a mercy in restraint. I didn't tell her it hurt. She knew. I didn't ask for details. They behave like mold in the mind." I poured tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug like a winter ritual, then didn't drink. We sat like that, two people who had shared 1,000 meals and no longer knew how to share air without measuring it. "Why did you ask for full custody?" I asked finally, and my voice didn't crack, which felt like both accomplishment and failure. She took a breath that shivered when it left her. "Because I wanted a headline," she said, "a big word to stand behind so the small ones couldn't find me." She looked up. "I was cruel to both of us, to him even." Her mouth tugged at a rueful smile. Turns out I'm mediocre at cruelty. It doesn't fit. She reached into her bag and slid a small notebook across the table. This is for Theo, she said. It's letters for the next 6 months. For the days I don't see him, for the days I do, for the days he asks why we changed the shape of his home. I opened it. Her handwriting sat there in careful rows, not quite straight, not quite not. The first page. Dear Theo, today the rain sounded like a train, and I pretended we were going to the museum to see the dinosaur bones you think belong to you. Something inside me exhaled for the first time since the bathroom mirror fogged and betrayed us. I closed the notebook gently, as if it were sleeping. Thank you, I said, and the words had more shape than they had any right to. We talked then not about blame or repair, not about versions of us that belonged to rooms we no longer lived in, but about the road between 2 apartments and how to make it soft for small feet. About handoffs at the park instead of doorways. About one house holding Thursday night spaghetti without resentment, the other holding Saturday morning pancakes without apology. About birthdays as holidays we both owned. We made a map, and it did not look like us. When the kettle hissed again, I refilled our cups. At the sink, Lena spoke, voice almost lost in steam. I still wake up reaching, she said. Not for you. For the certainty that used to live where my chest is. I turned. She was looking at her hands like they'd just been introduced. I can't ask you to forgive me yet, she went on. Not because I don't want it, but because I can't wear it properly if I don't know how to hold it. I nodded. Maybe forgiveness isn't something people wear. Maybe it's lighting the room you're already standing in. She almost laughed. Since when did you become the poet? Since I ran out of things to throw, I said. The rain paused then, as if the sky remembered another appointment. Lena stood, walked to the window. The city hung there, soft-edged and blinking. I need to say something I have no right to say, she said, not turning. I waited. I miss the way you used to make the bed like a promise, she whispered, even on days we couldn't keep it. I came to stand beside her, not close enough to make contact, close enough to recognize us. I miss the way you used to hum while you cooked, I said. That little 2-note thing like you were tuning the room. We didn't touch, we didn't try to resurrect anything. We stood and watched the traffic learn patience at a red light. Then, because time is rude, it moved. She turned back, shouldering her bag. I'll pick up Theo at 4 tomorrow, she said. We'll take him to the botanical garden. He likes pretending the leaves are dinosaur footprints. I smiled, which felt like a small treason that didn't deserve punishment. He'll make you name every fern, I said. She reached for the doorknob, then hesitated. She began, stopped. I want you to be happy, she said, the words finding a seat between us. Me too, I said. You too. The door opened. The hallway waited with its quiet honesty. She stepped out, then turned back, and for a moment, the years aligned, and I saw us choosing each other all over again in a different life where we were softer, braver, and less afraid of the slow work. But this is this life. She nodded once, left, and the latch clicked, a punctuation mark that declined to decide the sentence. I washed the 2 cups, dried them, set them side by side. The apartment did not feel empty. It felt like a room catching its breath. I opened the notebook again to the last page she'd written. The letter there ended mid-sentence, a thought she hadn't finished on paper. I closed it, left it as it was. Outside, the sky carried its gray gently, and somewhere distant, a siren moved past without urgency, as if the emergency had already learned to be lived with. Her unsentenced confession hangs in the room. Forgiveness is near but unnamed. Morning decided to be tender. The light came in like it had learned patience, slipping across the table and warming the rings our cups left as if to say, nothing is wasted if it taught you how to hold it. The city made its soft noises, delivery trucks coughing into awareness, shoes negotiating with sidewalks, pigeons arguing about nothing and meaning it. In that hush where households wake in sections, I stood in the kitchen and counted breaths until the number felt less like a defense and more like a rhythm. Letting go didn't arrive as a speech or a sudden lack of love. It came as small agreements with the present, a decision to keep the blue mug because it fits the hand, not because it belonged to a memory, a decision to stop checking my phone for the shadow of a name, a decision to make the bed neatly because a day deserves that kind of respect even when no one will see it. Theo woke, climbed onto the couch, and watched the light do its slow choreography on the ceiling. Is today Thursday? He asked. It's the day with spaghetti, I said, and he cheered like tradition were a magic trick. We ate breakfast with the windows cracked open enough to taste the air. He told me his dream, about a dinosaur that grew flowers for feet so it wouldn't be loud. That's considerate, I said, and he nodded solemnly, as if he'd invented empathy and was only now realizing it could be shared. When I walked him over to the park at 4, Lena waited at the gate, hair pulled back, wearing a jacket that made her look like someone who takes long walks and forgives weather easily. Theo ran to her with the velocity kids reserve for people who are home in any room. She scooped him up, and their bodies made a shape that healed the part of the day that didn't know how yet. We exchanged that look parents do: inventory, reassurance, a small smile to acknowledge the job's liturgy. Botanical garden, I asked. Botanical garden, she said. We'll bring the notebook back with drawings. Name 3 ferns, I told Theo. He made up all 3, then made up 3 more. Lena laughed and her eyes joined in. For a second the world tilted toward remembered sweetness, but it didn't take me with it. They left hand in hand, and I stood at the gate longer than needed, not because it hurt, but because endings deserve witnesses. On the walk home, rain threatened, and then decided not to. I passed the cafe where I'd met Aaron and felt nothing sharp. He had receded into the proper size of his part in this story, small, human, a lesson about the rooms we open when we forget to dust our own. I bought groceries from the corner market, chose tomatoes by touch, remembered how she used to test avocados with a thumbprint, and a smile that made the word ripe seem flirtatious. That memory didn't bruise me anymore. Back home I cooked enough spaghetti for 2 houses without intending to. Habit is a bridge sometimes. I packed half in a container, wrote "for tomorrow, extra cheese" on a sticky note, then laughed at myself in 8 seconds. The apartment began to feel less like a waiting room and more like a place where I lived. I put on a record that sounded like rain even when it wasn't. I wiped the counter in slow circles that didn't pretend to fix what wasn't mine to fix. As dusk arrived in its soft coat, the phone buzzed. A photo from Lena, Theo under a canopy of green, mouth open in awe, his hands reaching toward a fern frond larger than his head. The caption, he named it Gentle Claw. I typed. Approves of this science and added a dinosaur emoji he prefers. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, thank you for not making me your villain. I'm trying to not make me mine either. I put the phone face down, not to avoid it, but to let the moment be enough. The window accepted its night. Across the street, a lamp turned on in someone else's living room, and a woman sat on a couch, exhaled, closed her eyes the way people do when they've remembered to feel their lives instead of folding them into neat stacks on a mental shelf. I stood there breathing with a stranger, which is another way of saying, I remembered I was part of a city, not its exception. Later in the blue hour, Lena knocked again. She held out the notebook. He drew a dinosaur with flowers for feet, she said, smiling like a truce. He said it was quieter that way. He invented mercy, I replied. She nodded. He did. We didn't talk long. She handed me a folded paper. Parenting class schedule, she said. I signed up for Tuesdays. I thought you might like Wednesdays. I took it. Okay, I said, and the word had the kindness of a small coat on a cold morning. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. I haven't asked for forgiveness, she said, not because I don't want it, because I think forgiveness is something I have to meet halfway. Then meet it, I said. Take the long way if you need to. I'll keep the light on for when it's your turn to rest. She closed her eyes, opened them, and nodded. There was no hug, no music swelled. The latch clicked, and the quiet that followed felt like a quilt rather than a cave. Morning came again, as if it had never left. The first light landed on the bedspread like coin on water. I made the bed like a promise, neat corners, smooth sheet, pillow centered. I brewed coffee and let it bloom a room into honesty. In the notebook, I wrote a line for Theo. Today, the dinosaur decided to walk softer, and the whole forest listened. I closed it, left it on the table, and stood at the window long enough to see the city wake and not need me to explain it. Letting go isn't the same as saying goodbye. It's the slow understanding that the story didn't fail. It finished the chapter it knew how to write. In the space it left, another one waits, not better, not worse, just true in a way the old one couldn't be anymore. Outside, the light was clean and kind. Inside, the rooms were not empty. They were ready. And in that modern, ordinary morning, with rain deciding to keep away for now and the coffee forgiving everything it touched, the heart did the small, astonishing thing hearts do when nobody's watching. It stepped into its own light and stayed. When nobody's watching. It stepped into its own light and stayed.